welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you this morning on Channel 9, on WJOP-LP Newburyport at FM 96.3, and also on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm honored to have this morning's guest with us. Dr. Matthew MacWilliams is here. He earned his PhD in political science from UMass Amherst, and he's an expert on American authoritarianism. He's the author of the impressively succinct but mighty book on fascism, 12 Lessons from American History. He shows us how authoritarian attitudes are far from new, but course throughout American history and compete with our egalitarian and democratic aspirations. Among the lessons included in his book are the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Trail of Tears, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and others. His book is sobering, but I hasten to add it's far from hopeless, because among the foremost things it is a declaration of the power and the importance of knowing history. As Matthew puts it in his book, denial and division will not save our republic, but coming to terms with our history just might. So Matthew, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time to visit the morning show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. Well, Matthew, I wanted to start out, your book actually begins with an author's note that's a very powerful statement of your intent in writing it. And that's where I'd like to begin our conversation this morning.
Sure.
If you could talk to us about why you decided to write the book, what the 12 lessons are designed to reveal and underline for us, and why it matters, especially today.
Well, you're absolutely right. Denial and division are not going to save our republic. And that's really what we're talking about, saving our democracy, saving the constitutional system of the United States. So I wrote on fascism to provide context and try to explain for people the rise of Trumpism, the activation of authoritarianism, these dangerous times we're in, and what's at stake. You know, there's this tug of war going on in our politics, our polity, and our society right now, between our better angels, you know, our aspirations towards equality and opportunity, and the authoritarian impulses that have been activated by the present politics and social media, and really the whole environment that we're in. So I believe we got to confront authoritarianism. We have to confront our history and reconcile it. We can't hide it. And that's how we'll move on.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's so many eye-opening things in your book, Matthew. It's hard to know where to begin. Well, one of the eye-opening features of your book for me was the polling data that shows the substantial
Sure.
gap between what we think of as fundamentally and widely shared and accepted American values on democracy and equality and the actual extent of Americans' commitment to democratic principles. Could you sketch out for us how extensive that gap is between our assumptions about what our shared values are and the reality? And give us maybe an example or two of some of the surprising polling data that demonstrate how large that gap is.
Well, thank you, Mary. You know, there's this gap, you have it absolutely spot on, between the truths that we assume to be self-evident. I mean, you know, I grew up believing, I think as most of us did, that everyone in America believed in democracy and the Constitution. No, there are problems, there are incredible problems that we've been resolving over hundreds of years, but we were moving towards a better place. This gap is just, if we don't understand this gap, we can't understand the problems that we are occurring now. And one of these gaps is just support for democracy. I bet if I asked you or people in your audience, what percentage of Americans do you think consistently support democracy? You know, we measure this in polling in 5 different questions, but consistently, and we measure it across the world. And I bet most people would say 80, 90, 70%. Some of the cynics might get to 70. It's 54%.
Yeah.
You know, it's just over 50. And I can tell you that number comes from a 2019 poll. Work I've done in Europe has shown consistent support for democracy going down. Mm-hmm. In Germany, it was in the low 50s. It's now in the high 40s. So it's gone down. And one of the things that's driving that is another thing that's really surprising. Another fact I think that's surprising. This is polling data. There's a question on the World Values Survey that's asked globally. We also ask in the United States. And you're asked, do you agree or disagree that this is a good way of governing my country? And the question is, having a strong leader who doesn't bother with Congress and elections is a good way of governing.
Yeah.
And 31% of Americans, so let's say it's 28, it could be 33, somewhere in there, but 31% of Americans say, yeehaw, yes, that's a good way of governing our country. Those two things together, consistent support for democracy or lack thereof, and this willingness to give up to a strong leader are incredibly dangerous in the society. And then the last one that really gets me is the percent who agree that increasing racial, ethnic, and religious diversity represents a threat to the security of the United States.
Yeah.
That's 44%. You know, what happened to e pluribus unum? You know, from many one, that's like a basic, but 44%. And obviously, you know, the demographic changes that we're seeing in this country are driving that. And it's driving fear, and it's driving really the fearful politics we see right now. And it's beyond politics. You know, I was asked about this when my book first came out 2 years ago, almost, or a year and a half ago. I was just asked about it yesterday. I said, you know, we are living in the most dangerous time since the Civil War. And the reason is violence has been determined to be, or has been accepted by some as legitimate political discourse. And violence, you can't solve problems through violence, at least in a democratic society. Maybe in Russia you can, but you can't do it in a democratic society. So there's that gap. We have to recognize that gap. We have to fix it, but that's a long time. But right now we have to address it.
But if we don't start now.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing.
We're really behind the curve then. And I think one of the services that your book does is draw our attention to the statistics, the data that you just shared with us, and how the data is not getting better, it's actually getting worse. The one
and your point, you know, if we just deny it and say, oh, everything's going to be okay. I mean, that's what the political system has made me angry, because for the longest time, oh, sure, democracy's being torn down, all the guardrails are being thrown over, but it will get better. Why will it get better? You know?
And how?
How? Who's going to do it?
Yeah, because everyday news stories don't kind of promote a lot of hope.
No, you know,
give more evidence. So
my family calls me end of the world MacWilliams, basically. But the thing, I'm really hopeful, but I also am clear-eyed. And what I'm clear-eyed about scares me deeply.
Yeah, and I think the more people that can become clear-eyed, the more people will recognize how urgent the challenge is. And it's a challenge that we've confronted, as your book points out. It is a challenge we have confronted in the past, but we need to ring the alarm bells and wake up the people and the forces and the strategies and the resources that have been used in the past, and we can use them now too. So
exactly. Now's not the time to jump in a hole and cover it and hide. Now's the time to take action.
As tempting as that can be.
To save our democracy. I mean, it's only the longest existing democracy in the world. Maybe we should do something.
Yeah, and I often think that people just, we've been fortunate to have a longstanding democracy. So I think people often can't imagine what it would be like to lose it, how their lives would tangibly change in ways they will not like. So, well, you know, following up on some of what you've been talking about, Matthew, I wanted to ask you for some clear-eyed definitions. I find that some of the words, particularly like strongman, you know, or autocracy, authoritarianism. They're being used a lot now in the news and by commentators, but I think often in ways that don't clarify what they actually mean. And so I think that can sometimes be a barrier to the alarm bells going off, because you have to understand that a strong man is actually a dictator. It's not a strong leader. It's a dictator. And I think you get more people saying, no, I don't want a dictator, than people who might say, I want a strong leader, because we think of strength as a good quality in someone's character. But when social scientists and a lot of journalists use the word, they use it in a way where I think they assume people will know they mean a dictator. And I don't think most people do know what that means. So as our next step, and in the service
Sure.
of clarity, Matthew,
In the service of clarity, this is good. Defining your
so we
terms.
clarified that strongman folks means dictator, but autocracy, authoritarianism, fascism, and also the phrases liberal democracy and illiberal democracy. And I think when people hear liberal, they think liberal conservative in the way we talk about Democrats and Republicans, but they have a different meaning in this context. So could you provide us with some definitions of those terms, Matthew, in whatever order you want?
Yeah, happy to do it. And you're right. These terms have become, when I first put the word authoritarianism in an article at the end of 2015, which came out in 2016, I was lambasted for it. It was like, you can't use that word. When I first used that word in Europe at a meeting of leaders in Europe, leaders of Europe, they said, no, we don't have that any longer. It was like a swear word. And I said, well, you got to call it what it is. But now it's just everything's authoritarian, or, so here's some simple ways to think. Autocracy is the rule by one person. And absolute power. People are not citizens, they're subjects.
Yeah.
And there is no appeal except to dear leader. And dear leader sets the rules. Think of autocracy. North Korea is pretty close to an autocracy.
And no one wants to live in North Korea.
No, they've got really bad kimchi. But no, you don't want to live in that, because rule of law is the rule of whatever the leader thinks at that time.
Yeah.
Authoritarianism is it's the level of analysis of authoritarian, so individual, societal leadership. But let's look at it at the individual level, which is where I study it. And it's a worldview. It's a way people see the world. And there's certain people who are more likely to prefer authority, obedience, uniformity, traditionalism, however it's defined at the particular moment. And there are other people who are more likely to be like independence, freedom, diversity, they're fine with. And so it's a spectrum of worldviews. And it's not deterministic. I score pretty high on the authoritarian battery, but I'm not authoritarian in my political practice. So it's not determinative, but it is helps us predict people's actions, attitudes, and behaviors. And I also think of authoritarianism as sort of the gateway drug to the demise of democracy, quite frankly. And then there can be authoritarian leaders. Those are leaders who might not believe in authoritarian obedience, but they use it to build and galvanize political power. And usually they use fear to do it. Fear is a big driver of authoritarian activation. I mean, authoritarians have been with us in our society, throughout our society. When we came over, those of us who came over willingly to the United States, our families, we didn't get washed or absolved of this authoritarian worldview. It's there, it's latent, and it gets turned on by fear. Fascism is, authoritarianism is the taproot, think of it, like a lot of my weeds, of fascism. And it is a far-right, ultra-nationalist movement and or government. So ultra-nationalist. So what distinguishes it from authoritarianism? Dictatorial power. So autocracy is part of that. Forcible suppression of opposition. And by forcible, I mean people die.
Yeah.
You look at from when was it, 1933 or so, when Hitler took power, to 1945, 96 members of the Reichstag were killed. Okay, so people get killed. There's
Eliminated.
regimentation socially,
Yeah.
and there's state capture and regimentation of the economy, which is very crucial. So what's a good fascist example right now? Russia. I
Yeah.
mean, Russia still has Navalny and others. I was out meeting with actually Russian independent media that's all been thrown out of Russia. They had to get out because they were going to be killed, forcible suppression. So that's fascism, and it's ultranationalism. I mean, Putin thinks he's Peter the Great. You know, I don't know what he's drinking, but I don't want some of that. And please don't give that to anybody in Washington. A liberal democracy, really key point, Mary. Liberal conservative that's ideological spectrum. It's not the same as the use of the word liberal and democracy. Liberal means, in liberal democracy, rule of law. Rule of law to promote individual rights, freedoms, equality, and opportunity as defined or identified by rational facts, not made up stuff, but rational facts, okay? And democracy, the second part of that, is a process agreed upon by all of us, we the people. So, in a liberal democracy, oh, I'm a conservative, I'm not for, yeah, of course you are. If you're a conservative, you're for liberal democracy, the way it's defined, okay? A liberal democracy is just a hoax. It's gaslighting. It's an excuse. Right now, the main purveyor of illiberal democracy is Viktor Orban in Hungary. And he uses that to disguise the state capture of media, judiciary. By state capture, I mean, the media is Orban's. This is not just Fox News being the mouthpiece for the Trumpism. This is the state media is captured by Orban, and they promote his view. The same with the judiciary. He's taking over the judiciary. There are elections, but when you have the judiciary and you have the media, it's really hard to win an election against them. And the freedom in that election, the way the structure of that election has been changing, so that only Orban or the Fidesz party can win. And they were actually, all the opposition parties in Hungary joined together to fight him in the last election, which was February. And they were on a course to get close to defeating him, even though the structure of the politics is such and the structure of the election is such, it's hard to defeat him. But then we had the invasion of, this was in March, then we had the invasion of Ukraine, and it changed the dynamic. And Orban said, I'm here to protect you. And people were scared and they voted him back in. So I think those are the five. I think those are the five you mentioned.
That was terrific. That was very clear and very easy to understand, and very important to kind of spread that understanding of what those terms actually mean, because I think they help people understand the danger that fascism presents, that the hoax of illiberal democracy presents. And I think people, before they, as we were saying before, people, before they pull the fire alarm, they have to know what the flames look like. So thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Hot. Those flames are hot, and not in a good way.
Well, I wanted to ask you to talk a bit about two of the lessons in particular that to me seemed really critical today. And one of them was Father Coughlin, whom I'd heard of, but I didn't really know very much about him. But he's known as the father of hate radio, and the precursor of, these are quote marks, fake news, and the power of just ranting and shouting in sheer repetition of lies to create an alternate understanding of reality. So could you tell us more about who he was? And in particular, I appreciated your discussion of what you talk about historian Richard Hofstadter's framework of the paranoid style in American politics. And Father Coughlin seems to be a great exemplar of that. So did you talk about that,
sure,
Matthew?
Let me sort of set a predicate, talk about Father Coughlin, and then talk about how it fits into the paranoid style of politics, which was historian Richard Hofstadter's book in 1964 that was really the Goldwater campaign was one of the things I think that pushed Hofstadter to write this book. So first predicate is, Madison, founding fathers, realized that demagoguery and conspiratorial fear-mongering was a real danger to our government. And they set up in the Constitution barriers to it. And one of those barriers, quite frankly, it's in Federalist 10, I believe, was the scope, the geographic scope of the Republic. A demagogue, back then you could do a newspaper and circulate it around, but a demagogue's message didn't have great reach. You could go down to the town, common and speak out, but it was hard to project power across and demagoguery across the scope of America at that time, the Republic, 13 colonies. So that's all well and good until radio starts to rise. Radio's analog, as we know. And when you start a radio station, like the radio station in Pittsburgh, it's a 50,000 watt, which has a gigantic reach, or the one that Coughlin used, WJR in Detroit, 50,000 watts, gigantic reach. And also you start building radio networks. So your message doesn't go out just in one 50,000 mammoth channel, it goes out on channel after channel after channel after channel. They didn't start out at 50,000 watts, but they got there. So what Coughlin did, he started this thing, I have to look down my notes, the League of the Little Flower and its Golden Hour. It was in 1926. And it started out on a few stations and it grew and grew and grew into this marketing behemoth, where Father Coughlin became very powerful within the Catholic Church because he was making lots of money, bringing in lots of money. And it started out in 26, 27, 28, mostly positive, all about, Catholicism and thinking of the world in certain ways. But it started as his celebrity grew, his need for power grew. And then we had the Depression and there were bad times. And he stumbled on, I think it stumbled on, conspiratorial thinking, fear-mongering as a way to build audience and to keep audience, which is why he became the father of hate radio. So what did he do in the 1930s, early 1930s? He started blaming international bankers for the Depression. And international bankers is code language for Jews. It's anti-Semitic. It comes out of the elders of the Protocols of Zion, right? The Protocols of Elders of Zion. Henry Ford was big into it, and he started down the dark path of using negatives and using hate and fear to build and hold his audience. This led to 1936, where he had such a gigantic audience that a political party was started, which lost. FDR won, and it kept going on. Now the Nazis are rising to power. He started promoting, not directly, but certainly indirectly, Nazism. A good example is the 1938 Kristallnacht, which was the night of broken glass in Germany and Austria. He blamed that, went on the radio right after it. I mean, it was an anti-Semitic wilding. He went out and blamed the Jews, people of the Jewish faith for Kristallnacht. What was his audience, you ask? That show, during that month, his audience was 40 million Americans.
Oh, wow.
32.2% of America.
Wow.
And Sean Hannity's audience, last time I looked at it, on a good week is like 4.6.
Yeah.
So
that's dramatic.
Oh, yeah. And it's hate just being spewed out. And so, he blazed the trail for hate, conspiracy mongering. He was first for alternative facts. Kellyanne Conway, you weren't first, you were just as wrong as he is. And the real pernicious thing is he showed that you could monetize. You could make money from hate. And that's, now, okay, we're out of analog, we're into the digital world. That's what Facebook does. Its algorithm looks and searches for hate, controversial messages that create division. And so, he sort of paved the way for that. Now, how does this fit into, and if this is too long, I'll tighten up, but how does it fit into the paranoid style of politics of Hofstadter? Hofstadter, writing in 1964, said, there's this phenomenon that you see running through American politics. And it really is sort of the backbone of my book, this phenomenon.
Yeah.
And this phenomenon is, he called it, and I'll do his quote, I think because it's so wonderfully written from the 60s, an old and recurrent phenomenon in political life.
Oh.
A greater affinity for bad causes than good. It was such an interesting time, and frequently linked to movements of suspicious discontent, which means conspiracies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in this book, he lays that bare, and he talks about it through America, starting with Timothy Dwight, who was president of Yale at the time, 1798. He wrote this book, The Duty of, he wrote this, made this speech called The Duty of Americans in the Present Crisis. And the present crisis at that time were Masonic societies and the Illuminati. And he said, this is a danger to America. You take it forward to parties saying, and people saying that the Pope wanted to control America and was going to install a Habsburg prince in it, which Hofstadter called, I love this, Puritan porn. I just thought that was perfect. And all that leads into nativism, know-nothingism, anti-immigration, anti-Catholicism, the American Protective League during World War I, which was a neo-fascist state-sponsored organization, and it brings us, quickly into McCarthyism too. Hofstadter, just a quote of his, I think is really great, because remember, he's writing in 64. He said, the paranoid spokesman sees the fate of the conspiracy in apocalyptic terms. He traffics in the birth and death of whole worlds, whole political orders, whole systems of human values. Go to Trump's American Carnage speech. Hofstadter is up in heaven going, I know him. So that's how that all links together. And that's so it's here, it's in American history. We just got to stop denying it, and we got to do something about it.
Yeah, the unifying theme of so much of what you've been talking about and so much of what your book goes into is just fear, galvanizing, triggering people's fears, and then creating a narrative about the source of the fear, the thing to be afraid of, and then mobilizing people to be opposed to or take action against what they perceive to be the source of the fear, which has been churned up by Father Coughlin.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a circular, but it's really effective is the thing we need to understand. The effectiveness of fear and the power of the amount of money in a capitalist society like America, that is something that needs to be factored in, just how profitable fear can be. The political consequences to the side, just that's a powerful motivator as well.
You make money spewing fear,
Yes. Yeah.
It's a really, that's very dangerous.
Yeah. You just cited briefly Senator McCarthy and the commie witch hunts. And I did, part of what was interesting to me about that was how that set the stage for focusing the fear and the othering on the enemy within, not foreign forces or powers plotting against the United States, but other Americans become your enemy. And so I was hoping that you could talk both a little bit about the power and the template that was set for that fomenting of antagonism and possibly even sparking violence against your fellow Americans. And also you're in that chapter on McCarthy, there's a lot of there's a very astute analysis of how demagogues can attain and hold power, because even people that see through them, even people who know that they're bad for the country, with the exception of Senator Margaret Chase Smith of Maine, who spoke out against McCarthy. And I understand she was ignored, but she did it, and she will be in heaven with Richard Hofstadter.
They're just going, oh my,
get it together. But they are afraid of the power of the demagogue's grip on the people that follow them. And so they don't do anything even though they know better. And one has to wonder what that does to their soul. But that's a different topic for another time. But I thought that your analysis of those things in your chapter on McCarthy was very powerful and very relevant to our time. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that lesson.
Yeah,
Matthew.
that enemy within has always been part of the fear mongering. McCarthy just put a brand to it, or he did his enemy within speech, which means we need to be scared of each other. Who knows if that person next door might be a commie? But you go back to Woodrow Wilson, the American Protective League. It was the same thing. He just didn't call it the enemy within. But he really weaponized it, McCarthy, to be fearful and to start these witch hunts looking for commies everywhere. It fit into the quote I love, that I think captures it really well. It comes from 1927. It's Justice Brandeis in Whitney versus California, and it was a dissent. And he talks about fear breeds repression, repression breeds hate, hate menaces stable governments. One of and he says this in the context, the people who founded this country understood that. So McCarthy was weaponizing that fear, building repression, building hate to do what? Why did someone do this? Power. It's all about galvanizing power. And if there is an other to be worried about, you got to say, well, who's going to protect me from that other? And the answer becomes, oh, the demagogue, the strong man leader, or just the strong man. Let's get rid of leader, the strong man who identified it in the first place. And when you identify an other and you're asking, are you part of the other or are you part of our group? It gets you to groupiness.
Yeah.
And so that takes us to the second part of your question. That enemy within, fear, intimidates people and divides, and you have to choose a side. And so for people, let's say, Congress people, all right, so middle feeders in the political system, are they going to be with him or against him?
Yeah.
Are they going to be sycophants and sniveling quislings or against him? And people a little bit higher up in the food chain, think of Bill Barr or John Bolton, they get rewards. And Jared Kushner, they get rewards for being with the guy. They get money. There was a great, why did Barr finally turn? Because he sort of played out his money options now. Bolton did not turn on Trump and tell us stuff we need to know. It would have led to his conviction until his book came out. And then he still didn't do it. Yeah. So there's that. And then there are the people. And for people, I'm scared. I'm an authoritarian. I'm fearful. I have authoritarian tendencies. This guy sounds pretty good. I'm going to go with him. And then I get all sorts of rewards. I get to wear a hat, which shows I'm part of the group. I don't wear a mask, shows I'm part of the group. I go to mass rallies and cheer. I have chants, lock her up, build that wall. So it creates a whole society where you're in or out. Yeah. So there are a whole system of rewards that flow out of this and that are manipulated by the leader to his or her benefit. Because hers, women can do it. Marine Le Pen in France is a good example. I have some footage of her from her rally in front of Joan of Arc in Paris. You're just going, okay, she's a demagogue. I know her. So that's how it all, and I don't speak French very well, you can tell. That's how it all sort of fits together. Again, why, that groupiness is like fear, activation, dividing into groups. And we just got to stop this division. We can't survive with a divided populace.
Yeah. Absolutely. In a way, as you describe it, Matthew, it's in certain ways the same psychology as schoolyard bullies use, as gang leaders and mob leaders do. It's you're with me or you're done for. And so
it is a mob approach. I don't know the mob well. I met them once in Philadelphia and in Providence. That was enough. But it's mob psychology.
and I mentioned at the beginning, your book is also hopeful because you offer us the lessons, and the lessons are there for the learning and the using. And you end your book with 10 steps to strengthen America, which are practical, they're important, and they're doable by any and every one of us. They include things like stop othering,
Yeah.
listen to one another's hurts is an important one, discern fact from fiction, and and I think the one that is fundamental is know your history. And I was wondering, Matthew, we have limited time today, but if you could just highlight maybe one of those steps that you feel you really, 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 really want people to pay attention to and do because it's really urgent and effective. That
Well,
may be like asking you who your favorite child is, but
well,
it may
my
not be
favorite
fair.
child's my dog Henry, who's asleep. Right.
Well, it's hard for any human to compete with a dog, in my opinion.
A
But you get
black
a sense
lab,
of
no
what I'm
less.
asking.
But I would put that was written and came out right before the 2020 election. I would add a new one that because the times have become even more urgent.
Yeah.
And that is you have to stand up. You have to call out and confront what's going on right now. And we just don't need to reconcile our history, but our current events. And
Yes.
January 6th is a great example of that. Some people make up this thing. Members of Congress who were there make up, as we all know, and said they were just tourists.
Yeah.
And that's an alternative reality that is incredibly dangerous. I mean, this is the discussion right now, but incredibly dangerous versus the reality of it, which was an insurrection, with its point of its sphere right at the heart of our democracy. And they wanted to kill people.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi, Jerry Nadler, really nutball stuff. So we have to go back and confront our history. That has to be done. But the work that needs to be done today is confronting and standing up and realizing how dangerous this is. I think 2024, I was just talking to some people saying, it's 2022 will decide everything. It could. Depending on what happens with voting, the structure of voting, and the structure of counting votes in this country. But really, to me, 2024 has always seemed in the United States and across Europe as the key inflection point for either staying on democracy and building on democracy or jumping to an authoritarian future, which none of us really want.
Yeah.
In Europe, it's there have been state elections, federal elections, but it's European elections in 2024, which are under gigantic pressure because there's 6 million more immigrants. There's energy problems. The war in Ukraine is destabilizing Europe. People say, no, we're all unified right now. We'll see if that holds in September and October. And here, the 2024 election is just critical. Probably, who knows? It might not be Trump. I think it's unlikely it'll be Trump. But it won't be a Trump light. It'll be a Trump smart, very likely, who is and that person is part of and leading a fascist social and political movement, not a fascist government yet, but a fascist social and political movement. And there's no other way to describe it other than that, unless you're just smelling the roses and not paying attention.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Matthew. So know your history and know your current events, and allow the history to inform the level of alarm that you feel in response to the current events, and then do something, speak out.
Do something, speak out, go to marches, vote.
Act on your own values. So, well, and thank you for acting on your values and for speaking out in your book, Matthew. I have one final question as we close our interview for today. And I'm curious because I know that you travel around the world talking about authoritarianism, autocracy, fascism. And I wonder what you hear from people in other countries about how they view American democracy today, and if they have advice to offer you or Americans about what they think we need to do to advance democracy in the US today.
Well, people around the world, and mostly Europe. I used to go to Ukraine a lot. I don't go there now. I have many dear friends there. Um, People in Europe, especially, are shocked. They really, America, our country is the indispensable country in the world because we stood up and have stood up for democracy and have really led the democratization of the world. And we're looked to for leadership and authority and for human rights. I mean, we make lots of mistakes. We do a lot of bad things. I'm not saying, but we, in the world, we're seen as something different than that. At least that's the way it was. Starting in 2016, that reputation started to fall, got into tatters. And I think people are as aware, people who study this and work in politics and social movements, that 2024 is a really make or break around the world. And it's not like democracy ends everywhere. It's the path that you're on. It's a path dependent thing.
Yeah.
And they're also, I got to tell you, they are, I'll have conversation after conversation about the violence in our society. They cannot understand this gun stuff at all.
Yeah.
I think it is, quite frankly, all part of the it's not a plan. I'm not a conspiracy theory, but if I'm scared kind of to go out to grocery store and stuff. The more scared we are, the more likely we are to, the more existential threats there are, the more likely we're to look at extra legal ways to solve them. Or maybe we've just become inured to violence in our society. But Europeans go, that's nuts. Just take away their guns. And obviously we can't do that, the Second Amendment, but the Second Amendment does say a well-regulated militia. And I don't think people with AR-15s walking in the schools or grocery stores are well-regulated.
Yeah.
So that's, I think the view from abroad is, please don't go down this path because we need you. That's what we need you. And Russia, it's moving to Ukraine, Moldova, Armenia, Republic of Georgia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, interest in the Baltic states, is frightening a lot of people in Europe.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, I can't thank you enough. It's been, it was illuminating to read your book, and it's
thank you.
Illuminating again to talk with you. And I really appreciate your taking the time. And if anyone would like to learn more about Matthew and Matthew's book on fascism, you have your own website. And so if people want to learn more, Matthew, could you share with us the link for your website?
I think it's just, I hardly ever go there, but I think it's just Matthew MacWilliams, MacWilliams.com. Or if you just put in my name, Matthew MacWilliams, it should come up.
It'll come up.
We have good search engine optimization, which I'm not sure we do.
And so people can find information about where they can get your book and more information about you and about the work that you continue to do here and around the world, sharing the knowledge. Matthew, thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that you've done and the writing that you've done and the service that you provide. So thank you. Take care. And thanks again for taking time to visit the show. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Well, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
My pleasure, Matthew. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.